Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Oh, yeah. Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning, my friends. It's another beautiful Tuesday here in the great state of Alaska. More blue skies and sunshine. It's it's a summer to remember so far. Let's just hope it stays that way. It's beautiful out there. We hope you had a good Monday. We're ready to crack into it with this Tuesday morning stuff. It is the early morning pain session, I guess is what we'd like to say. It's the pain session. Nah, it's just truth, man. Just truth. Sometimes truth hurts, though. You know, sometimes it's a little bit of stuff. It's the weekly top three. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is about to join us here, and we're going to dive into it and get down into the weeds a bit on some of the different stuff. In hour two, we're going to be finishing up the hour with Chris Story from Homer, and I'll be having commentary and discussions and recaps and everything else in between. But we got a lot to cover this morning, so we're going to get right into it. Brad Keithley is jumping in with us here right now. Let's go over here and see him. Hello, my friend. How are you this morning on this beautiful Tuesday?
Michael, I'm doing great today. I think I'm going to rename this Truth Tuesdays as opposed to the weekly top three, just to sort of get my point out there.
Just to say, it's just the truth. I mean, it's not my fault if the truth hurts, right? I mean, that's what it is. It's we shouldn't call it the weekly beating. I mean, that would be just too on point, I think, sometimes. All right, Brad. Well, let's get cracking. You got a lot of big topics here today, and some of it is I just have to laugh at some of the framing of some of the things that we're talking about. Specifically, this morning, talking a little bit about in number one, bipartisanship versus the Fiscal Coalition, and this all kind of stems. Kelly Merrick had this wonderful opinion piece about how bipartisanship is so great, and it was so full of. There's a horse around here somewhere because she's shoveling something a lot in this article, but I'll let you take a crack at it here and get started this morning.
Well, Merrick did have an op-ed in the Anchorage Daily News that it was headlined "Bipartisanship Produces Results." Bill Wielechowski had something similar to it on his Facebook page. Kathy Giesel had something similar to it on her Facebook page, and it wasn't just the Senate, and it wasn't just the in the House. It wasn't just the minority, the House coalition. Justin Ruffridge had an op-ed piece on the Kenai. Actually, it was an opinion. It was an interview. Ruffridge talks success, unfinished business after freshman session in Juneau, and he talks about essentially achieving bipartisan results without using the word. I'm reminded a lot, frankly, of something that I learned at the federal level, sometimes working with the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Maya McGinnis is the head of the Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget. She's been on the show with you talking about federal matters. And this is this is something she says about bipartisanship, the word bipartisanship at the federal level. It's a lot easier to compromise on things that are easier. Only where we get bipartisan compromise these days is where both parties get what they want and nobody pays for any of it. And so we end up borrowing more for it. In other words, bipartisanship is code word for Republicans and Democrats both get to spend on the things they want. Republicans on defense, Democrats on non-defense items, and they have a bipartisan compromise where they just keep spending more and more and more, and nobody in the current generation pays for any of it. They just shove it off to future generations. In other words, bipartisanship means Republicans and Democrats get to spend, and the guy who pays for it or the person who pays for it is the person that's not in the room. At the federal level, it's the future generations who are getting this massive federal debt piled on them. At the state level in Alaska, it's middle and lower income Alaska families who are getting piled on, who are not in the room during the time that these deals are being made. It's interesting to note that none of Merrick and none of Wielechowski's achieved results, mention anything about fiscal matters. Merrick's breakdown is fighting crime, expanding energy production, improving public schools, addressing workforce challenges, improving healthcare. And that's her list of bipartisan achievements. Ruffridge focuses mostly on education. Wielechowski focused mostly on education. It's things that cost money. Education, certainly K through 12. We've increased spending for K through 12. Improving healthcare, improving childcare. Those are all places that we've spent more money. Expanding energy production. We're now going to subsidize producers in the Cook Inlet by floating loans to them, essentially non-recourse loans, recourse back to us, non-recourse loans. All these things that cost money, but none of them are listing any accomplishments on the fiscal side. Ruffridge claims, we got a balanced budget, but balanced on who? It's balanced on the person who wasn't in the room.
On the permanent fund, right? I mean, here's the thing. Well, and Kelly Merrick's piece is, I mean, again, it just retreads some of the same old stuff that we're leaving the flat funding on education and all this kind of stuff, and we're supporting employees by this. We passed the defined benefits plan, which ultimately died in the House, but it's protecting them, and it's all about the spend. It's just spending with no balancing act as to where the money's coming from.
Yeah, exactly right, Michael. So bipartisanship, I mean, some people say, the objective here is bipartisanship. Well, bipartisanship, as Maya said, bipartisanship is just a code word for we both get what we want. And we pile the cost onto somebody else who's not in the room. So if somebody claims in Alaska that they're going to, be part of a bipartisan coalition, or they're extolling their achievements as a result of bipartisan cooperation, that's a code word for be very concerned, because what that is that both sides are getting what they want at the expense of the person not in the room. So as we look around, as I've started to look around at candidates and to look at their websites and to look at their positions and their policies, I'm looking for people who are talking about fiscal matters, but talking about it in a way that actually achieves results, actually produces something. A great example of that is David Nelson, who's going up against Cliff Grow. And David Nelson's website, when he talks about what he's planning to do or what his platform is, all Alaskans can count on me to, point number one, protect the PFD by putting it in a tough new spending cap in our Alaska Constitution. I voted for the full PFD 10 times, yet it remains a partisan football. And so that's the sort of thing, I mean, building around a coalition that may include Democrats, may include some Republicans, but a coalition, that's the word at the federal level that Maya uses, and it's the word, I think, at the state level that I'm going to use when we talk about, who's going to participate in achieving fiscal sanity, who's going to participate in achieving fiscal reasonableness. It's not those who are claiming bipartisanship. Bipartisanship, again, is just a code word for we get to spend on what we want. You get to spend on what you want. We pile the costs on the person that's not in the room. Fiscal coalition to me means we're going to spend, yes, but we're going to find a way to continue to spend, but we're going to find a way to pay for it in a way that has the lowest adverse impact on the Alaska economy and has the lowest adverse impact on Alaska families. And I think that's going to be a key distinction in this coming election between people who are claiming that they're bipartisan and working toward bipartisan objectives and people who explicitly talk about a fiscal coalition. Interestingly enough, so I see this opinion piece by Merrick, and I thought, okay, what a great setup. She's got an opponent in that race. She's got several opponents in that race, but one of them is Jared Gecker that a lot of people talk about as being a great candidate and stuff. You go to his website, the word PFD doesn't appear. It's getting spending under. It's the old claims of getting spending under control, and we're gonna get ourselves to a reasonable budget and that sort of stuff. But the word PFD doesn't appear, and so you sort of wonder. I've heard this. I've gone down this road before, where people say, I'm going to get spending under control. It doesn't happen. James Kaufman's a perfect example of that. James Kaufman went in and said, I'm going to get spending under control. I've got a spending cap. We're going to preserve the PFD. We're going to do all these other things. And then, poof, it disappears in the night. David Wilson from the Valley is another great one on that. So you've got to look at what these positions are when the candidates come forward and say they're going to do great things. Bipartisanship's a code word for, but at the end of the day, bipartisanship's a code word for I'm going to spend, you're going to spend, we're all going to spend, and we're going to go on down the road by piling the costs on the person that's not in the room.
And this seems to be the buck passing thing. I mean, I find it interesting that Gecker doesn't have the word PFD in there. And I wonder, is it because he doesn't want to paint himself into the corner when he knows that there's no fiscal will to get everything done? But sometimes you got to take a stand on stuff like that, right? If you won't stick your hand up to say, hey, I'm part of that crowd, then nobody else will. And then all of a sudden it's just in the background and nobody's thinking about it, right? I mean, that's the thing. You got to point out where the problem is. And if you don't do that from the very beginning, it's not like you're going to pop into it later, when everybody else does. It's like somebody's waiting for somebody to take the first step.
Yeah. How could you trust a candidate to deliver later when he won't even put it in his platform when he's running for office? I mean, Jeremy Bynum down in the Southeast, another one endorsed by the Alaska. You got to have the list of the Alaskans for Prosperity, action or whatever the heck it is that they call themselves, and the candidates they've endorsed. It's a mixed bag in terms of fiscal matters. Jeremy Bynum down in the Southeast has on his website he's going to protect the permanent fund. That's not the same thing.
Right. Protecting the permanent fund and the dividend are two separate things at this point. Right.
It's you're going to protect the permanent fund because you want to continue to spend it. What about the PFD? What about protecting the portion that goes to Alaska families? And so
it's the same thing. It's the same thing with Hajdukovic. It's the same thing because we had her on the program and she would not come outright and say that she is for protecting the PFD. Because again, she's concerned. I mean, she's a more moderate Republican in that regard. She got a little bit of an eye-opening when she came on the program and got interviewed here, because I think it really showed her that there's a class of folks out there in our listeners and in kind of more on the conservative side, the smaller government side, that may not necessarily line up with what she's got, but she's still got the Americans for Prosperity Alaska endorsement. So, I mean, I guess there wasn't really another choice in that race because it was her or Kawasaki. So some of these races are pivotal and they may move the needle, just maybe not as far as we want.
I guess, Michael, to me, we ought to focus on the races that do move the needle. We ought not to just endorse another, she's not as bad as he is, type of race. If they're not moving the needle forward, she may win, he may win, but they're not moving the needle forward. You want people, just based on the website, you want people like David Nelson, who's going to, move the needle forward. You want people like Ben Carpenter who are going to move the needle forward. You want to find people who are saying this is an issue, fairness to Alaskans, fairness to Alaska families, prioritizing the overall Alaska economy is an issue. And I'm going to stand for that issue, and I'm going to stand for the PFD, and cutting spending is one way to do it. Finding alternative revenues is another way to do it. But that's a pole I'm putting in the ground. That's a stake I'm putting in the ground that I'm going to stand on. And we ought to find people like that and build a coalition. And there's some people on the Democrat side that are going to say that. You ought to find people like that that are willing to put a stake in the ground for the PFD, and then build around that coalition, not bipartisanship, not that old word, but find people who are willing to be part of a coalition.
The problem is that they've changed the word bipartisanship to mean something that it doesn't, right? I mean, it's not just working together. Like you said, it's working together to spend more to have somebody else pay for it. That's the definition of the word has changed. Bipartisanship in and of itself, not a bad thing, but when the way they use it today, it's that changing of the vocabulary and the changing of the language, and they've changed the definition of it for sure. All right, Brad Keithley, our guest. The weekly top 3 continues. Number 2 is dead ahead. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. We continue with more, and Brad Keithley and the weekly top 3 right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Kevin says, moving the needle forward has to start with getting to a majority so you can drive the bus and assign committee chairs. I mean, I would agree with that. I think, again, that's probably what the endorsement for Hajdukovic is getting Kawasaki out to help move the needle on that majority in the Senate. Audrey in Fairbanks says the same thing. We have to get Kawasaki out. Leslie's knocking door to door and asking people what they want. So we need to be ready to tell her. And I think that's what we tried to do on the program when we had her on. She was a little not overwhelmed, but a little surprised, I think, by the reaction from some of the things and some of the questions that we had on it. What day did you interview Leslie on your show? I'd have to go back and look. You can go back and look at my SoundCloud file where all my podcasts are, and you can search through there. It was 2 months ago, 3 months ago. We had Leslie on the program. But I mean, again, Brad, bipartisanship, the true definition is not necessarily a bad thing. The thing is now it's being used as code for we got what we want. And everybody, and basically it's a brag list. That's what this bipartisan, thing is. I mean, the thing with Kelly Merrick, it was essentially a brag list. Look at all we did, and we could do more if we could only get more people into our team of spend more. That seems to be the answer.
Yeah, I agree with that, Michael. I think Maya just has it right. That bipartisanship has become this code word for we'll spend on what you want as long as you agree to spend on what I want. And we'll just stuff the cost to the guy who's not in the room. At the federal level, it's future generations who are going to pay for it through accumulating debt. And at the state level, at least in Alaska, it's middle and lower income Alaska, families who are going to pay for it through PFD cuts. Let me go. Kevin raises a point. I've heard this point before. I understand the point about chairmanships, being important. And so you vote for the party in order so you get chairmanships. But Delana Johnson, what we got in the finance committee, what we got in the finance committee was co-chairs out of the majority was Bryce Edgman, Delana Johnson, and Neil Foster. And they produced a budget, claimed success at producing a budget that was financed on the back of middle and lower income Alaska families through deep PFD cuts. So, okay, yes, we got a majority, but the majority isn't producing. So when the majority doesn't produce, what do you do? I mean, when the majority just ends up being another form of coalition that agrees to spend, Delana claims success off this last legislature. We came to agreement. We did things. Julie Colomb got her child care tax credit through. We extended the education tax credit, which is another one of Justin Ruffordge's claims. Tax credits being, code word for more spending that's outsourced through corporations. We claim we got all these successes, but the successes came at the expense of middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts. They came at the expense of the overall Alaska economy through PFD cuts. So, okay. But when the majority doesn't produce, when you get all these committee chairmanships and the majority doesn't produce, fiscally responsible results, what the heck are you going to do? You fool me once, fool me 20 times. Do I finally, see another path?
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess it was a while ago. It was actually back in January. I posted a link to the Leslie Hajdukovic interview there in the chat room. People can see it. Ron says, all of those trying to build the size of government want to save and even build the permanent fund. They never say they will protect the dividend. There is a big difference. Yeah. And that's the truth, because that goes back to that $100 billion mark that they want for the permanent fund, right? Because then it just spins off money for government every year, and they don't have to worry about it. That's why they were trying to push all that money into the corpus of the fund and take it out of the earnings reserve. It was a twofer. They got to create the crisis, and they got to push that money up to the $100 billion mark, which is what they want to keep government running. Forget about what happens to the private economy. I mean, private economy, what's that? Anyway, Brad Keithley, our guest. We're going to continue on here. Please like and share, like and follow wherever you're watching. You can share it. And special interest picks the chair, says Chris on Twitch. Yep. All right, here we go. Jumping back in. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Let's do this thing. Here we go. 4 seconds. 3, 2, push the button. Push the button.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay. We're continuing on here. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. We continue now, going over these things. Let's talk a little bit about number 2, which is how revenue design works. Brad, you've got thoughts on this. Revenue design, how does it work? What are you talking about here?
Well, the Alaska or the Anchorage sales tax is the example that I've picked. Probably not the world's best example, but the example that I've picked, and I've got the world's best example that'll come up after I talk about the Anchorage sales tax. But the Anchorage sales tax is an example, a partial example of revenue design. Revenue design is you're not increasing revenues, which is why the Anchorage sales tax isn't the perfect example, but you're redesigning the way you get revenues. Something like 2/3 of the 80% of the revenue, 2/3 of the revenue that is going to come from the proposed. It's proposed that the 2/3 of the revenue that's going to come from the proposed Anchorage sales tax. There, I got all the proposed in there. That 2/3 of the revenue that's going to come from that is going to be used to reduce property taxes. And so what you're having is one set of revenues replacing another set of revenues. And sales taxes, while they're certainly not the least regressive, they are less regressive, and in that way more pro-economy than property taxes. And so you are going to what the Anchorage sales tax is doing in part is proposing to replace one set of revenues that you're going to get that are regressive, property taxes, and replace that with a less regressive set of taxes, at least with that share of the income, less regressive set of taxes in the form of sales taxes. The other thing about sales taxes is they will tap into the tourist market in a deeper way, non-resident market, if you will, non-resident revenue source in a deeper way than do property taxes. Certainly we have non-residents who own property in the state, in Anchorage, and certainly that they are paying a share of the property taxes but the share paid by non-residents will increase by moving to sales taxes for that share of revenue instead of property taxes. So the point is, taxes, a tax proposal isn't always about increasing revenues. A tax proposal is to change the way in which we get the same amount of revenue and do it in a better way. Do it in a less regressive or in a more expansive and a more broad base, in the sense that you're getting non-residents, increasing the non-resident share. And it's good when you do that. It's good when you replace one revenue source with another revenue source that is a better revenue source. There's also an advantage. I mean, most tax experts will tell you that you want to diversify your tax base so that if one portion of the tax base gets hit by a depression or gets hit by falling values, that you have a different set of a different portion of the tax base that may be staying stable or increasing at the time. We do this with oil taxes. One of the reasons that the corporate tax, the tax on petroleum corporations is so important, and why I complain about the Hill Corp loophole so much, is it's a diversification of the petroleum tax base. It's a way of gathering a share of income that is separate and apart from being dependent on oil prices, or being dependent on royalties, or being dependent on production volumes. You sort of get that money in a different way, and so you diversify your tax base and protect yourself, hedge against bad outcomes in one area. So the Anchorage sales tax, I mean, people shouldn't have an immediate allergic reaction to talking about a sales tax, to the extent it's being used to replace a worse source of revenue. Now, the problem with the Anchorage sales tax is 2/3 of it's going to go to replace property tax, but the other third of it is going to go to increase spending. Right. And so, yes, it's bad in the sense that it's going to be generating revenue for additional spending. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't think that all taxes are bad because a portion of the Anchorage sales tax is going to be used to increase spending. Focus just for a moment. I mean, just before you throw out the baby, focus on the fact that 2/3 of it is going to be used to replace a less beneficial revenue source. Another example of this, and the much better example of revenue design, is Ben Carpenter's sales tax that he proposed in the last legislature and as a Ways and Means bill, and never got out of the Ways and Means Committee. It was exactly the same thing, except it was better. It was a sales tax, and what he proposed to do with it was to take the revenues from the sales tax and reduce the corporate income tax. In other words, supplant the corporate income tax, a portion of the corporate income tax. We have one of the highest in Alaska. We have one of the highest corporate income tax rates in the nation. And what he was going to do was reduce that corporate tax rate, reduce that corporate tax rate down to a much more competitive level, and try to use it as a tool to attract additional corporations for operations in the state. And the other portion of it, that was again about 1/3 of it was going to go to reduce the corporate income tax. The other 2/3 was going to go to reduce the PFD, was going to replace the PFD. So some people are going to say, well, Ben Carpenter was in favor of a sales tax. No, he was in favor of redoing the revenue design that we've currently got, that is hugely regressive, works against the interests of the overall Alaska economy by taking money out of the pockets of Alaskans only. Does not collect anything from non-residents. The current revenue system doesn't collect anything from non-residents. He was going to take the revenues not to increase spending, but to supplant, replace existing revenue sources that are worse. He was going to use it. He proposed to use it to redesign revenues. So when we have these allergic reactions to taxes, think for a moment about the purpose they're being used for. Not all taxes are being used to increase spending. Some taxes are being used to replace other taxes,
right,
that are worse, that have larger adverse impacts on the economy and on families.
Well, and I think starting off with the anchorage sales tax is definitely some problems there. I mean, first and foremost, it's an overall increase in the taxation, although it drops the taxation on property owners by whatever it was, $1,000. The overall spend was an additional $250 on households, and so when it's all said and done, it's a net in the long run. And what we've discovered in the past, when people try and take a sales tax and say that it's going to offset property tax, it does in the short term, but in the long term, historically, you end up with both going on and both going forward and both increasing. In fact, the example that they used, which was Oklahoma City, where they said they had a temporary sales tax. If you look at it today, that was in the 90s. They said we used Oklahoma City as an example. Today, Oklahoma City has a permanent sales tax of 5%. So 4.8% or whatever it is, plus the state sales tax and everything else. So, I mean, you're right. We need to look at it, each individually and each thing in isolation, but we also need to look at what historically has happened in those regards as well.
Michael, I don't disagree with that, and certainly we don't want to be increasing revenue with taxes, but to have this allergic reaction to say taxes are bad, period, end of discussion, end of sentence. That's counterproductive, because we already have taxes, and we're going to continue to have taxes. We're going to continue to have, if we don't have an alternative source of revenue, a lower impact alternative source of revenue, we're going to continue to have PFD cuts, which are the ones that have the largest adverse impact on the overall Alaska economy and have the largest adverse impact on middle and lower income Alaska families. We're going to continue to have taxes. So to have it's not helpful to just immediately have an allergic reaction to the time to anybody who says taxes. You've got to look at what the tax does. And I agree that the Anchorage sales tax has a component in it, a third of it is going to be used to increase spending. I agree with that. But let's focus on the fact that 2/3 of it, and I'm not saying I support the Anchorage sales tax, but I'm saying let's look at it before we just toss it out the window. 2/3 of it is being used to reduce a worse tax. And people will say, oh well, we'll just reduce it. What we ought to do is reduce spending. Well, it doesn't happen. And what happens as a consequence is we continue spending funded by the worst tax, funded by those who claim bipartisanship.
Right.
In agreeing to the spending, funded by the worst tax. So we've got to be smart enough that when somebody says tax, we just don't say, no. We've got to be smart enough that when somebody says tax, okay, what are you going to use it for? And
right.
If it's used for revenue design, if it's used for revenue redesign, to reduce the burden or to spread the burden, as would be the case with the sales tax, because of the pickup that it has with respect to non-residents, to spread the burden out so that the burden's not entirely concentrated as it is through PFD cuts on Alaska families. It's when somebody says, we're going to have a tax that does that replaces other sources of revenue with better, less impactful, less bad sources of revenue. We're smart enough to realize that, and we're smart enough to support that. And the Anchorage sales tax is an imperfect example because 1/3 of it's being used to increase spending, but it's useful to understand that at least a portion of it would be used for revenue redesign.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. He gets the last word for this segment. We got one more segment coming up. Man, this is going fast. I can't believe it. We're already into number 3. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Dukes Show.
All right. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. I don't know. We're expanding. Government spending in Alaska is projected to increase over the next decade. Yes. I mean, I don't know why you think that's a good thing. That's not an expansion of the private economy. That's just an expansion of the spending. I mean, that's the problem. And the bottom line, Brad, and I agree with what you're saying. We have to take each piece in isolation and look at each piece on its merits. But again, my fear has always been, even when we've talked about an income tax or anything else, is that without something like a spending cap, that they will just take that money and then add to it and then take the other money anyway. It has to be a full fiscal plan that includes that spending cap, because otherwise it'll be just like Anchorage is doing. We're going to change it. We're going to take away that bad tax of the property tax, which I agree with is probably one of the most evil taxes that I can think of. We're going to place it all on the sales tax on the consumption side. We're going to overall increase the actual number of taxes. Now we're going to spread it differently. Oh, and we're going to use a third of it to build more. And that's the problem, right? I mean, that's why the spending cap is so important.
Yeah, I agree, Michael. I mean, David Nelson, to go back to a candidate who's got at least his positions are right. David Nelson says that protect the PFD. All Alaskans can count on me to protect the PFD by putting it and a tough new spending cap in our Alaska Constitution. I agree that they go hand in hand, but people who hear the word tax and just explode are part of the problem. They're not part of the solution, because we've got taxes. We've got a tax in the form of the PFD tax, which, longtime ISER professor Matt Berman says is the most regressive tax ever proposed. We've got taxes. We're not going to get away from taxes. The question now is, what's the lowest impact tax? And it's one that spreads the burden broadly so that each individual piece of it is low, and one that spreads it relatively evenly across as a share of income across all Alaska families, and also, to sort of get ahead of Harold for a change, also includes oil companies who are not contributing. We don't have the oil tax rate set at the maximizing revenue, at the revenue maximizing level from oil companies. But we've got to get away from this sort of knee-jerk reaction of taxes bad, I oppose it, because we've already got taxes. The question now is, we've got evil. What's the least evil in the world that we can do, and finding ways to broaden the base to include non-residents and equalizing the impact across income brackets is what you search for.
You and Chris agree. Taxes are evil, but again, what is the lesser of all evils in the long run? I mean, that's I agree. And look, I don't immediately shy away from the idea of taxes. I agree that it has to be addressed and at least analyzed, because otherwise, and this is what I've said for a long time, that people are like, oh, I can't believe you talk about taxes on your show. Well, if we don't talk about it, first of all, we're already facing it. We just don't know. It's a stealth tax that it's just not labeled as a tax. But Berman at ISER and others have said, well, it is a tax, the most regressive one you can get. And then secondly, if we don't talk about it, if we don't talk about the intricacies of it and what the ramifications are of it, it'll just sneak up on us and club us in the face anyway. They'll just bring it up, and the next thing you know, it'll be there. And because we refuse to talk about it, we will have no input on how it's implemented or whether or not it works. That's the problem.
Yep. Holding your breath and saying no taxes, no taxes, no taxes is the upper income and the oil companies, the non-resident industries all love that, because they're getting away with murder. They're getting away with pushing the tax burden down on middle and lower income Alaska families. You're getting away with pushing the burden down on the source that has the largest adverse impact on the overall Alaska economy. They don't have to pay it, because of the way it's structured, they don't have to pay it. So they love these people. They love these people that go, hold their breath and go, no taxes, no taxes, no taxes, because they're then they get to continue using PFD cuts, largest adverse impact, most regressive tax ever proposed. They continue to use PFD cuts to fund government. In Anchorage, set aside the fact that a third of it's going to be used to increase spending. In Anchorage, the tourist industry loves the property tax because they don't pay it. They don't pay near the share. They don't accept near the burden that they will out of a sales tax. So think about when you talk about taxes, think about who's getting away with not paying that particular tax. And are you okay with that?
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. Again, share the show, like, share, describe, discuss, get more people involved. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
That's just mean, but that's what he does every day. Welcome back, The Michael Duke Show. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. We're on to number 3. Fastest 2 hours in radio. It's amazing. Number 3 is all about the Cook Inlet. Somebody should probably do something is the answer. I mean, we've got all this hand wringing and pearl clutching going on by certain members of the legislature and of the utilities. My favorite comment so far today has been from Kelly Merrick, where she talks about her energy production, expanding energy production. And she says, together, these bills, the bills that they tried to work on in the legislature, will enable our utilities to build out more affordable energy produced in Alaska rather than becoming dependent on expensive imported LNG. I mean, there it is. I mean, not that if the state pays for it, it's going to be more expensive. It'll just all be hidden costs. Don't worry about it. I mean, in the long run, I mean, somebody should do something, Brad. Somebody should do something.
Well, that actually is a sentence. Somebody should probably do something. Is a quote from what I think is a great article about the Cook Inlet energy crisis. There's a blog called, for those of you who don't follow it, there's a blog called the Alaska Energy Blog. It's written by a woman by the name of Erin McKittrick, who's in Seldovia of all places, but who also sits on the Homer Electric Association board. The title of the article, it's dated June 4th. The title of the article is, "Why are the warnings about Cook Inlet gas getting more dire?" And it goes through a great list of, or great explanation of how we got into this situation, what's the situation we're in, and what are the alternatives for getting out of it. And like everybody else who seriously looks at the issue, as opposed to John Sims, everybody else who seriously looks at the issue, you figure out quickly, wait, focusing on spending state money to develop more Cook Inlet gas through subsidies or through subsidies of various forms is a dead end proposition, because it's only going to get you a small amount of gas over a short term, and it's going to be more expensive than the alternative of importing other U.S. gas. Remember, the U.S. is the largest LNG exporter in the world, the largest source of LNG on the water in the world. So Alaska sources would just likely come from other sources in the U.S. It's not like we're talking about Russian gas. We're talking about other U.S. gas. And so, like everybody else, Erin goes through this analysis and says, yeah, we need to be talking about LNG. We need to be getting on with LNG, and we need to do some other things, renewables and so forth, but we need to be getting on with LNG. And she, like us on the show, just she explains there's no clear reason, or there's no clear understanding of why the utilities aren't moving forward on an LNG project. And when they do move forward, they move forward on a greenfield one at Port McKenzie that requires the construction of a new LNG plant, requires the construction of new pipelines, and probably is going to mean a major adjustment to the NSTAR system, because they've never gotten gas from that particular source, that particular direction before. When we've got, instead of pursuing the existing Kenai LNG plant that Marathon owns, has been talking about turning around, has approvals, at least partially, to turn it around, and exists right by existing LN or NSTAR lines that go by it. Aaron's the quote at the paragraph or at the section that says, in conclusion, the first line is, somebody should probably do something. Somebody should probably go forward and get started on the process of getting essentially LNG in place, to meet the long terms, the short, even the intermediate and long-term needs of the Cook Inlet. Yet nobody's doing it. And the people that you would think would be doing it are NSTAR or the electric utilities that use gas as a fuel source to generate electricity, but nobody's doing it. And the problem is, the longer we don't do it, the more behind the curve we're putting ourselves down the road in having that alternative source ready to go when Cook Inlet declines kick in to the point that you need to have LNG. Aaron points out, and I think correctly so, there are alternative LNG sources, but they're a hell than using an LNG plant like Kenai LNG. There are alternative LNG sources that are a lot more expensive. Short cylinders that you put on barges and bring up and unload LNG, hugely expensive on a per unit basis compared to large scale LNG. These cylinders are hugely expensive, but they're short-term solutions. And Aaron's point is, the longer we put off developing the LNG facility, the long-term, intermediate and long-term LNG facility, the more dependent we're going to be on these barge sources for bringing in LNG in the meantime, as the Cook Inlet winds down. And so it's somebody should do something about the long term. To me, the person not, or the agency or the entity not being discussed that should be discussed at the center of this is the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, who has the obligation to supervise the utilities in their performance of their obligations. And one of the obligations of the utilities is to be able to provide adequate service. And one of the tenets of providing adequate service is to have a gas supply, is to have an energy supply, to be able to provide service. The utilities have that obligation. It's part of their certificated obligations. The RCA, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, has the jurisdiction and the authority and the responsibility to overlook the utilities in their performance of that obligation. If utilities not living up to the standard of the obligation to serve, it's the obligation of the RCA to step in and tell the utility to do it, or to fine the utility, or to do whatever it takes to motivate the utility to meet the obligation. So when we talk about someone should probably do something, it should be the RCA. That in the absence of the utilities stepping up, it should be the RCA that steps up and says, what are you doing about this situation? And if you're not doing something that ensures low cost, reliable service to Alaskans, then you need to get on with it, or we're going to do things in our regulatory power to ensure you do.
It was interesting because Aaron's article, which I've posted up in the chat room for folks who want to read it, goes on, and it actually lays out, she said the timeline says something along the lines of, the timeline of this is very confusing because they've said stuff all over the place, and she actually documents out the timeline to show you. And it just seems to me that this, again, kind of focuses on the fact that this is like they're trying to create the crisis to force the issue and things like that, because they've kind of been all over the place. This essentially, again, appears to me as a layman, not understanding every intricacy of all these issues, that literally what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the state to pay for a big chunk of this, so that one, they don't have to, and two, that everybody feeds at the trough, so to speak, and everybody gets their cake and eat it too, instead of having this other option out there.
Yeah, it's uniquely Alaskan. I mean, we've been through this. I've been through this over my career in Louisiana. I've been through it in Oklahoma. I've been through it in Texas. Nobody ever thinks about going to the state to getting the state to pay for it, because the utilities, private companies, as part of their certificate, as part of their monopoly power, as part of their certificate of convenience and necessity that gives them a monopoly over a service area, as part of that, they have the obligation to go do it, to go get the supply, to make the decisions to get adequate supply. No one ever thinks about, oh, state, bail me out, give me money, or subsidize the producers, or do something to save me from myself. It's up to the utilities. They have the obligation to do it, to go do it. And the utilities go do it. And if they don't go do it, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission in the case of Oklahoma, the Texas Public Utilities Commission, or the Railroad Commission in the case of Texas, the Louisiana Public Service Commission in the case of Louisiana, Mississippi Public Service Commission, all come in and intervene and say, look, why aren't you doing this? Hold hearings. Why aren't you doing this? And if you're not going to do it, then are you putting yourself in violation of your obligation to serve, of your certificate obligation to serve? They all no, and the response isn't, oh, let's go to the legislature and get ourselves bailed out of this. That isn't the reaction. The reaction is, yes, sir, understand. I've got the obligation to do it. I'll start making the investments to be able to do it. NSTAR at least appears on the surface to be trying to skip out of that and say, oh, it's not our obligation. Yeah, I know you gave us a monopoly, but yeah, it's not our obligation. It's the obligation of the state to go subsidize us somehow. And it's just, I mean, we're going down a rat hole, and in the meantime, the situation is getting worse and worse. The situation in terms of the lead time, the time before which we can have the solution in place, is getting longer. This by inaction in the meantime, the time by which we have the solution in place is getting longer and farther and farther and farther away. So somebody should probably do something. It should be the RCA that starts doing something.
Somebody's got to get up off their rusty dusty. Otherwise, we're going to be facing a real crisis when the time crunch comes. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. Brad, thanks for coming on board and joining us as always. It's educational.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Painful but educational is what we like to say. All right, folks, we're out of time for hour 1. Hour 2 is dead ahead. Chris Story will be joining us. A little recap and other headlines. Back with more right after this. I mean, I don't know. I know that. Did you get an invite to testify in front of the RCA, or was
No, they have a public comment period, so I took an opportunity for public comment period to comment.
Yeah. I would love to have been a fly on the wall to watch the reactions from that. Because basically, when you said, "Hey, this is your job, you need to step up and do it," this idea that somehow. And again, this emotional idea that somehow we have to have Alaskan gas to be able to survive, or somehow we failed if we can't use Alaskan gas. We failed as a state. We failed as a people if we don't have Alaskan gas. Sometimes it's just the economics of it. I mean, if it's stranded gas and you can't get to it, that's not necessarily your fault. I mean, that's not how it works. And if it's cheaper in the long run, or in the short run even, to import, why don't we at least have a plan B, right, Brad? And it's not like they're even going with a good plan B. They're going to McKinsey and want to build a whole new plant instead of going to the Kenai, where there's a plant already built, and all they got to do is reverse everything and turn the spigots on. It's like their plan B is really a plan Z or something. I mean, they're way down on the thing. They're not even talking about it.
Well, plan B, I mean, I think I'm coming to the conclusion that their plan B of going to McKinsey is a plan to look so bad that you've got to double down on plan A, that you've got to make these subsidies to the Cook Inlet, because plan B is just so expensive and so, off the charts in terms of additional permitting and all sorts of things that you've got to run through. that you'll never get it done. So we've got to go to plan A. I think that's what plan B is. I think it's intentional failure or intentional difficulty in order to keep diverting people back to plan A. But the problem is, I mean, as Aaron points out, as every other person who has looked at this seriously points out, plan A is at best a short-term plan in terms of production levels, in terms of volumes, and it's more costly. I mean, that's what the utility report, last year's utility report, the consultants report hired by the utility said that it's more costly to develop additional Cook Inlet supplies than it is to bring in LNG. And so it's just, we talked on last week's show why Instar might be motivated to do this. One is they want to keep prices low in order to preserve demand. If prices go up, as they're going to be from the Cook, as they would be in any event, regardless from the Cook Inlet or from other sources, prices go up, there's going to be a response, a demand response, and demand will go down. And two, they're trying to avoid having to invest themselves. If the state will subsidize Cook Inlet production down to levels that, Instar buys it, then Instar is able to put off investing in the kit necessary to bring in lower cost supplies. At some point, Michael, this is going to get me bad messages. But at some point, you begin to wonder whether Instar isn't putting itself at risk down the road if they put off developing alternative sources of supply through LNG. If they keep putting that off, and down the road we have to pay these exorbitant supplies for bringing in LNG by cylinder, you begin to wonder whether the RCA at that point shouldn't be penalizing Instar by saying you can't recover all those costs because your failure to plan, your failure to put in place alternative sources, lower cost sources, has put us at the cost of these LNG by cylinder supplies, LNG on barge supplies. And so, I think it's short-sighted of Instar not to be progressing forward publicly with a doable low-cost LNG supply, as opposed to what's going on at Port McKenzie, or their proposal for Port McKenzie.
Kevin says Port Mac could, quote, provide rail transport cheaper than pipe to Fairbanks. Well, sure. I mean, and if I had a gazillion dollars, I could probably design a plane that would, haul LNG to Fairbanks. I mean, yes, it could, except it's not there. And all the stuff in the Kenai is there. Like I said, all they got to do is reverse everything instead of export, make it import. They've got some of the permits. They're already well ahead. They've got the storage. They're ready to go. I mean, or we could build a whole plant from scratch, fight about how we're going to connect a rail line to it from Port Mac. I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't be a good thing to have that. I'm saying it's not the solution, especially as they continue to shrink the window down to say, oh, it's 2030. Oh, it's 2029. Oh, it's 2027. Oh, it's 2025. I mean, they're, continuing to try and put pressure on this to create this crisis. I mean, that's the problem. Why do we ignore? And you might be right. Maybe this is all part of the plan, to create a plan B that looks so bad and so iffy that we've got to go with this plan A option that doubles down on it. It's crazy stuff. Yes, you're right. If we had a Port Mac already, if we had a rail already, if we had all those things already, it would make sense. But we don't.
The permitting problems are going to be of building a grassroots LNG facility at Port McKenzie. It's just, it's going to be huge. Alaska has one of the benefits of the existing oil and gas structure that we built up in the state is that we have existing facilities. We have an existing Kenai LNG plant bought by Marathon. It is beyond me why we don't hear Marathon LNG as part of this discussion. Why we're talking about all these this new grassroots facility. That's just, as Aaron says, somebody should probably do something. Well, yes, somebody should. RCA, if you're listening, you should be the one that starts doing something here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Brad, we got to go. Thank you so much for coming on board. Appreciate the call and being part of it today.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Folks, hour 2 dead ahead. The Michael Duke Show continues. Your home for common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Here we go.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Oh, man, they're a little salty in the chat room this morning here as we just finished up with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budget. The weekly top 3. Again, some really interesting discussions on some of the problems that we've had here in the state. And I'm going to take a crack at some of these things that Brad has brought up and we'll get into it. But I think Jeffrey is expressing a little frustration in the chat room where he just says, screw it. Let's vacate the rest of Alaska and just build giant concrete Soviet-style apartment complexes in the Anchorage Bowl. Sometimes it feels that way, right? Sometimes it feels that way that we're just living, we're only living here at the behest of the government. And when it's all said, well, I mean, like I said, we've had legislators who have actually said that the government economy is the economy. What private economy? What are we talking about? What private economy? The only private economy they care about is the one that services the public economy. As long as that private economy out there is servicing the government workers and the government contractors and the government itself, they're okay with that. That's just knock on for them. They really care about the government economy and the rest of the private economy, the entrepreneurship, hey, that doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what goes on there. And it's a frustrating thing. So I want to take apart a little bit here some of these opinion pieces before we get into some of the other discussions for this morning, including the deeper look at some of the endorsements for this upcoming race. A little bit more on that sales tax in Anchorage. And even some of the difficulties with the Permanent Fund Corporation, which has gotten all the way. By the way, it's gotten into the sights of the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal now is taking some time to scrutinize what's going on with the Permanent Fund, and it's an interesting read. Suzanne Downing over at Must Read has it up. It's an interesting read, and I want to get into that a little bit as well as we move forward. But let's talk for a minute here about bipartisanship. Brad had a whole segment on this in hour 1, where he talked about, specifically that bipartisanship is code for essentially Republicans get to spend on what they want to spend on, Democrats get to spend on what they want to spend on, and that nobody really talks about who pays for it. And that's really, again, the idea of bipartisanship is not bad in and of itself. The idea that people can work together and find a compromise, I mean, that's kind of the ideal for bipartisanship, right? I mean, that's when a lot of people think of bipartisanship, I think that's definitely what they think, is that people come together. Some, one side gives a little, the other side gives a little, they come to a compromise. And, what was the definition of a compromise? Where nobody gets everything they want and nobody's really happy in the end, but it is what it is. And, but unfortunately, bipartisanship has become code, as Brad talked about, for basically everybody gets to spend the money they want and nobody talks about where the money comes from or who pays for it. Kelly Merrick had an opinion piece that was published here 3 or 4 days ago in the ADN. And she goes on, and look, it's campaign season, right? So everybody's talking about their achievements, right? This is what this is what we've done. Look at me, look at what I did. And she and Wielechowski and others, Giesel, they continue to tout this bipartisan. Giesel has gone full on. She's been campaigning around with Matt Clayman and others, basically, basically saying we're one and the same. I mean, it's not just bipartisanship. It's basically, we're all the same. We're great people. We all love each other. And by working together, we can spend your money in the most ridiculous way possible. I mean, that's not what I'm paraphrasing what I'm taking out of it, but that's essentially what's going on. But I want to take a crack at this opinion piece from Kelly Merrick because, again, every time I talk about Kelly Merrick, I just want to look at people in Eagle River and go, I told you so. I told you so. When Kelly Merrick was running for office and there were other candidates there at the time, there are other options, and I said, you guys, you can't, you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake. I know it says R next to her name, but look at her accomplishments. Look at who she sleeps with. I mean, who's her husband? Look at where is the sphere of influence that she comes from? And it is the, union sector, governmental spending sector. I mean, anybody who was paying attention prior to her being elected is not surprised at all that this is the direction that she took. I mean, when she first started, joining these bipartisan coalitions or working hand in glove with the Democrats on some of these things, everybody had this shocked look on their face, except for me. Again, not that I'm anything special. I look at where people come from and what they're doing prior to. It's like when Lisa Murkowski, was appointed to the Senate, and I said, "Whoa, that's not gonna," because Lisa Murkowski was not a conservative. I mean, ostensibly, Frank Murkowski was at least some kind of conservative, but when he got his daughter in there, I was like, "Oh, that's not going to be good," because I've looked at her track record in the state legislature. I mean, this is not rocket surgery. Stop paying attention to what they're saying and look at what they've done. Look at who they're hanging out with. Look at who their sphere of influence is. This is not rocket surgery. So Kelly Merrick's piece says bipartisanship produces results. That's not necessarily an inaccurate statement, either with the original definition of bipartisanship or with the new definition of bipartisanship. The question is, results for whom? In the original definition, it's probably better for the people overall because there's a lot of compromise involved and nobody's really happy in the end. With the new code word for bipartisanship, it produces results for those who want to see the government spend increase, who see the government, the public economy as the economy. That's who it produces results for. So let's just kick down into some of the things that she highlights from this last session. She said this was one of the most productive Alaska legislative session in years. And from a certain perspective, yes, I mean, they definitely got some things across the goal line. They definitely got a chance to talk their talking points about certain things. But the question is, was it really beneficial for Alaskans, not just in the short term, but in the long run as well? And that's what we seem to be lacking, is this long-term idea. Nobody's addressing the deficits in the governor's 10-year plan. I mean, the governor, this is not, this is the governor's office that says, here's the projections. And we're going to be starting in deficits in the next 2 years. And for the next 8 years beyond that, it's all deficits based on what we're doing now. But nobody's addressing that in the long term. Their idea of a fiscal plan, according to the Senate and the Senate president, is the 25-75 plan. That's their fiscal plan until that money runs out, and then it becomes a 20-80 or 15-85 or a 10-90 or just 100% of the PFD going to government spend. That's their plan. No PFD. And then what happens when all of the PFD is consumed? What happens? What do you think is going to happen? When all of the PFD is consumed, the people get nothing from it. The government takes it all. And then the next year trips along and they're looking for another $150 million because that's the base increase. Even if they change nothing else, it's going to go up about $150 million a year. Where is the money going to come from? Do you really think at that point they're going to cut? Oh man, they got the sunk cost fallacy going on big. We got way too much invested. We can't cut. This is way too much invested in this. We can't cut any of this. And so what'll happen? Oh, well, they'll come to you and reach into your pocket. Not only will they have taken all of the PFD, then they will implement some form of tax on you. And because we were unwilling to at least talk about it, like I said, we'll just get smacked in the face with it. Anyway, sorry, I ran far afield there. Here's what Kelly Merrick is talking about. Fighting crime. So this is one of her talking points. Fighting crime is one of the things that they worked on. And she talks about stronger penalties for drug dealers, fentanyl dealers, which, I question as to whether or not that's as overblown as it is. But I mean, I'm all about people, especially, pushers, violence, drug dealers, those kind of things. I'm all about making sure that those people are taken care of and taken off the streets. I'm all about that. But then she goes on to say the Senate also passed critical legislation to fix Alaska's worst-in-the-nation retirement system for police and other public employees. But unfortunately, this legislation died in the House. She's talking about defined benefits. Again, where did she come from? Who is she married to? What circles did she run in? This is all about the unions and the employees going back to defined benefits. And then she gives you the dire warning. We will have more work to do next year supporting police, prosecutors, and strengthening our behavioral health care system. So this is fair warning right now. This defined benefits is not dead. They're going to keep pushing. This is their talking point. Education and defined benefits and energy are going to be the three huge talking points for this group going into the next session if they all get reelected. Then she went on to talk about energy, expanding energy production. Now, there's another story. Where's the headline? Did I miss the headline? Anyway, there was another headline that I saw this morning that said, even with royalty-free options, there's little interest in exploring Alaska's gas. That was essentially the headline. And I think it was in the 80. I don't remember where it was this morning. I've been reading I got up early this morning, was reading a lot. But the bottom line is that even what we have right now, there's not a lot of interest. But they're all about this energy production and getting Alaska royalties, not just them not paying royalties. I mean, they could be paying them back. One of the new plans could be, we're going to issue you some kind of credit tax. I mean, they've done it before, but that's the next thing. She goes on to talk about the legislature and the governor worked closely to pass legislation to eliminate unnecessary charges for electric transmissions, et cetera, et cetera. But she goes on to say, together, these bills will enable our utilities to build out more affordable energy produced in Alaska rather than becoming dependent on expensive imported LNG. The LNG it's at rock bottom right now. Imported for U.S. LNG, it is a much cheaper option than what they're proposing in the long run. Again, this attachment, this fetishizement, the fetish of it must be Alaskan gas that we're burning in our energy producers and in our homes, and it's got to be Alaskan gas. At what cost? Do we just ignore the fact that it would be cheaper in the short term and probably the long term to import the LNG for now until we can find a way to economically bring our stranded gas to market? Again, it's not your fault. It's not our fault that the gas is stranded. It's out of our control. And as much as we want to make it so, and as much government money as we want to throw at it to make it more acceptable or palatable, it is nothing more than a wish, an emotional response, a fetish to just focus on Alaska gas to the exclusion of all else. We've got 17 trillion cubic feet of gas on the North Slope. It sure would be nice to have it at our doorstep. It would also be nice if I had a Lamborghini parked in my driveway right now, but it's not going to happen economically for either one of us. Then she goes on to talk about public school. I'm starting to run behind here. We'll continue this. I want to get onto other stuff, but I want to get onto this thing now talking about the schools and the workforce challenges and some of the other stuff. This is the bipartisanship she's talking about. And I'll be honest, it all translates into more. MOAR. More. We need more. That's what it all translates into. More government spend. Every piece of this. We got to go. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show. Because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay. I mean, this is just the whole thing. I'm just so frustrated by this thing. Fat Ray says, yeah, Democrat Senator Lisa Murkowski. I mean, again, I know I knew that this was going to happen. When she first got appointed by Frank, I was like, ooh, she wasn't even cut from the same cloth that Frank was. And he was iffy at times, right? A lot of times. But she was like barely pretending to be a rhino, let alone be a conservative. I mean, this is the thing. Randy, I don't know. I might want to live in Randy's world just sometime. Just live in this world of, rainbows and unicorns and puppy dogs and butterflies. Sometimes that's the kind of world I want to live in. That's it's crazy. Yeah, Lisa Murkowski and Suzanne Collins are the best Democratic senators the Republicans ever elected. Pollyanna, says Jeannie. I mean, Randy is passionate. I always have admired Randy for his passion on subjects, even ones that I disagreed with, because he is passionate about it and he's not afraid to say it. But man, sometimes I just, what is it like living in your world? What triggered this comment was his comment where he says, even if the PFD is zero for 1 year, it could come back the following year if enough cuts are made to create the budget surplus. Randy, if there were enough cuts made to protect the PFD from going away in the first place, they would have done it. Right? I mean, if you know the PFD is going to be zero, where is the incentive to cut if they know the money is there and they can take it? Where is the incentive? And once the PFD is gone, what would incentivize them to cut back at all? Then they would just reach out for more. Where is the incentive? That's what you and I have talked about that a lot. There is, I mean, you have to starve the beast. You have to cut it off from the other end. That's why a spending cap is important. You have to cut it off from the other end. They are never going to police themselves. They're never going to make cuts. They've told you to your face, there's just no place we can cut. There's just no place we can cut. All right, I'm going back here to see what's going on. Cindy says, why did Trump endorse Dahlstrom? We're going to talk about that here in the next segment. But yeah, that just oof. All right. I think isn't that what they really want in the end, is for everybody to leave, I think, is what Jeffrey's saying. I mean, maybe somebody has that plan, Jeffrey. I mean, I would hate to think that that's what somebody's, master plan is, or that there's some cabal or behind the scenes shadow thing. But I mean, in the end, if you fully believe that Alaska should be preserved as a great park and everything else, then yeah, maybe that is the intent in the long run, is to get all these other pesky people out of the state that are just there to fly their flags and trip it up and ruin the view shed for all the other people who work for government who come here. I mean, it's let's see. Is Chris Story on today? Yes, Chris Story is going to be on, Barbara, here in about 15 minutes or so. We're going to have Chris on the program here. And Randy campaigns. He goes door to door. Again, I admire Randy. I disagree with him vehemently, but he's a guy that believes in what he does, and I can respect that. He puts his money where his mouth is. I remember he took out a half-page ad, quarter-page ad, encouraging people to tell Murkowski to sell the jet when the state had a jet for the governor. And he put his money out there. He you know what? That good for him. Whoa, just lost the light. Good for him. I mean, I got to admire that. I really do. Doesn't mean that I have to agree with it, but I do admire it. Oh, this comment rids the internet. Dahlstrom is the typical NPC, her and Sullivan. NPC, for those of you who don't know what that is a non-player character. It's one of those generic, in a video game, it's one of the generic peoples who are like, greetings, traveler. Greetings, traveler. Talk to me today. Greetings, traveler. I have a mission for you. Greetings, traveler. I mean, oh, man. All right, here we go. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Enemy. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
God, I'm such a bad radio host. I am such a bad radio host. My timer was off by 1 minute. So, that's just, I'm such a horrible host. But hopefully you love me anyway. I just, hopefully you love me anyway. Welcome back to the program. We're about 15 minutes away from talking with Chris Story, who's going to be joining us for our weekly uplift and life coaching lesson. We're going to need it when it's all said and done. Before the break, we were talking about the opinion piece in the ADN from Kelly Merrick. And the opinion piece talks all about how wonderful bipartisanship, wonderful. It produces results. It's wonderful. And I don't know if I've saved the best for last. Well, it's not going to be the last. I guess it's going to be the first part of this segment. I was hoping it would be the last of the last segment, but I'm a horrible radio host. Dang. Anyway, so she talked a little bit about fighting crime expanding energy production, and then she gets down into improving public schools. Again, the bipartisanship that we restored much of the funding that had been cut from public schools over the last decade. What are you talking about? What funding has been cut from public? Well, unless, of course, she's talking about the governor's veto last year, which was a cut to the increase. I mean, maybe that's how she's going to justify something like that it's a cut to the increase, that they only got half of the increase that they really wanted. But by the way, that still makes it an increase in the in the long run, in the short run, in the end, it's still an increase. We restored much of the funding that's been cut from public schools over the repeating the lie, the mantra that somehow we've been gutting our public schools. We've been gutting them for budget. I mean, regardless of the fact that it's now the second largest item in the budget, billions of dollars going into public education. That while the BSA itself has remained flat since 2017, out of the last 7 years, 5 of the last 7 years, they've paid millions of dollars over the BSA as an additional payment to schools. Just on that, just as like a bonus. And they've spent on all the other things regarding schools, not just they act like the BSA is the one and only thing. It's not. And in fact, educational funding over the last 20 years has increased over 35% in just the last 18 years, something like that. But we restored much of the funding that's been cut from public schools over the last decade. A lie oft repeated is accepted as the truth. And that's what this is all about. Again, repeating the lie that somehow we're failing in our educational, in providing for an adequate education for your children. And then, of course, we gut out the whole, the 22% of Alaskans that are, 18%. It's 22,000 students. Anyway, all the homeschooling and correspondence students that aren't towing the line and going to the government-approved schools in the brick and mortar and are competing with the education industrial complex, we punish them as well. And then she takes another bite at the apple and passed bipartisan legislation to support retired teachers who are able to come back to work and fill critical positions in schools, who are now double dipping. They're getting their retirement and they're getting paid. And I'm sure she wants to work into some kind of defined benefits thing for the tiers as well on top of that. It's just, she goes on to talk about workforce challenges, talking about childcare, how it's so great that we worked with the Chamber of Commerce. Like the Chamber of Commerce is, I've just got so many things to say about all that. The childcare thing just burns my cookies like there is no tomorrow. What was the where is it right here? There was another headline that addressed this, that talked about this, that there is a problem with childcare. Kids are enrolled in Anchorage. Parents with kids enrolled in Anchorage childcare are being turned away because there's not enough staff. That we have a deeper problem here than just funding and just throwing money at the problem. First of all, it's not government's job to throw money at the problem. Second of all, if we get government out of the way, maybe we could do this. And maybe you just start working out some deals with grandma and grandpas in your neighborhood. Why do we look to government for every problem we have? All right, I got to get out of this here. So anyway, you can read this article. Again, it's in the ADN. Kelly Merrick, bipartisanship produces results. For whom? I mean, for whom? And this is a story I wanted to get to. I've only got about 2.5, 3 minutes here, but this is, I can tell time. I can actually read the clock and see that I have to go. I should just, I'm such a horrible radio host. Trump endorses Nancy Dahlstrom in Alaska's U.S. House race. Ira Samuels over at the ADN writing about this. Trump made the endorsement on his platform, Truth Social. Dahlstrom, of course, is one of two Republicans. Nick Begich is the other one. And Trump wrote that Dahlstrom, quote, will be a tremendous congresswoman for the state of Alaska, just as she was your lieutenant governor. Nancy's a proven fighter. How is she proven? I mean, if you want any more of an example of how, if I hear one more time that Trump is going to drain the swamp, all I have to do is point to this post on Truth Social. That's all I have to do. He's going to drain the swamp. And then he endorses Nancy Dahlstrom, who's, I'm sure she's a nice lady. But it's a nothing burger, right? I mean, she is the most inoffensive candidate of just kind of like blandness we've ever seen. And this is what you want to drain the swamp. You don't keep sending the rhino candidate back. Not that she's a rhino per se, but she's been handpicked by all these people. Why do they just do not like what Nick Begich has been saying? This guy's been out there working hard. And so they want to add her as a spoiler to the race. I mean, Palin pulled out. Begich was going to do very well. He got in early. He's been fighting the whole time since the last election. He's really on top of it. He's got all this. Why? Why do you keep throwing the spoiler into the race? You think Trump is going to drain the swamp? I got news for you. He's King Gator of the swamp. He's admitted it in the past. I used it. I used to play in this pool. I used to do all this. I used to buy senators. I used to do all that stuff. He said it, but now I'm going to drain it? I mean, again, guys, I know Joe Biden and Trump hold a gun to my head. I would have to pick Trump, right? As far as the lesser of two evils. But why do I have to pick evil? That's not what I'm saying. Is he better than Joe Biden? Yes, but that's not saying much. And then he does this. What the actual hell is going on? I mean, Nick Begich was just down in Mar-a-Lago. He was just meeting with him. I mean, did somebody just say you got to endorse because the party is endorsing? Mitch McConnell wants this. Is this what's going on? The party politics as usual? And are there people out there who can't make their own decisions enough that they're going to, well, but Trump said it, I got to vote for her. Why? Sure, if you want to vote for Trump, vote for Trump. But then why wouldn't you use your own discretion and vote for somebody like Nick? I do not understand this at all. I mean, and Donald Trump endorsed Palin as well. So, I just... It's the whole thing. I mean, I would think Trump is a very smart man. Is it because Nick shares a name with Mark Begich? Is that why? Because Mark Begich was the Democrat, and a lot of the Begiches have been Democrats. His grandfather, Nick the Senior, the first, was a Democrat. Trump is smart enough to see beyond that, to see where the guy takes a stand. Just because one of them is a Democrat doesn't mean the other ones have to be. But it makes no sense at all why this is going on. Other than Nancy's been backed by every other part of the Republican apparatus in the state. I mean, the mainstream old boy network of Republican stuff. There's been districts that have endorsed Nick. There's other people. I don't know what to say to this. Again, I'm sure Nancy is a nice lady. Never spoken to her. Never had a chance to meet her. But I can't name one thing she did while she served in the legislature. I can't name one thing she's done while she's been lieutenant governor. But Trump says, "Oh, she's a fighter. She's a proven fighter." Over what? It's disappointing, to say the least. All right, we got to go. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Back with more right after this. Chris Story is up next.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes on Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Let's I'm going to get Chris on the show here in just a second. I'm scrolling backwards here to see what else is going on. Donald has no idea what Alaskans think about her or how she refused to even listens to evidence of threatening election integrity. The one job she had at lieutenant governor. Pathetic. NB3 for Alaska. That's Nick Begich III. How many years have you been doing this? I've been doing this a lot of years, and it's starting to wear on me a little bit. Just saying. I'm sorry, Randy. I misspoke. He wanted them to keep the jet, not sell the jet. I misspoke. I apologize, Randy. Thank you. Too many long weekends is what he said. Melissa saying, how long you been doing this? Well, it's tough. When you do 10 hours of live radio every week, week after week, and for some years it was 15 hours a week because I was doing a 3-hour show. Sometimes I had a producer to help keep me in line, but usually it was me flying by myself and doing it all myself. Sometimes I just, I get distracted. Squirrel. I didn't click back a minute, or I click forward a minute, or whatever. The good news is that it's radio and nobody's going to die, right? I can make a mistake and nobody's going to die. It's just radio. And maybe some of these people get a behind the scenes look at what's going on. It's a fun deal. All right. Let me get Chris on the phone.
Good morning, Michael.
Hello. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Did it connect properly?
It connected properly. You can hear me. I can hear you. That's the definition of connecting properly. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Oh, good. We're starting with you belittling me and analyzing me and actually mansplaining to me. It's what it really was. Yes. Good start.
Hey, you know what? Whatever it takes, my friend, to get you through the day. I'm here to persecute you throughout the day, if that's what it was.
Nice.
So, what's our topic for today, Mr. Story? Tell us a story, Mr. Story. What are we doing?
Dwight's right.
Dwight's right. Dwight D. Eisenhower. He did warn us about the military-industrial complex. You are right. He was right about that. All right.
Wrong Dwight, but that's okay. We'll get there.
But do you agree with me? I mean, is the myth?
Yes. You pay me to agree with you.
It's true. It's true. Check's in the mail. All right. Well, let me put you back on hold then, because I got to finish up with some of the comments here. And you don't care about the comments. Well, you could comment on the comments. Here, I'll just leave you up. We'll do it. Cindy says it will be up to Nick's supporters to push him through and emphatically send a message to Trump that he needs to listen to Alaskans and not what DC wants to support. Did you see what
I just emailed Senator Sullivan and thanked him for his work on the Russian food embargo, or whatever, call it what you will, relative to the Russian seafood that's being sold and so forth. But I also recommended that he distance himself from Patola and Lisa and publicly support Trump in his reelection, as the Biden crime family is not going to be able to take America to the next phase of being great. So I think that Nick needs to align himself and really try to get the support of Sullivan. That would be wonderful.
That would be interesting if he got the support of Sullivan. But Sullivan is, again, he's the, I think he's in the same boat as Nancy Dahlstrom, where he's beholden to the powers that be in the congressional arena. I mean, I got a minute here. What are your thoughts? I mean, you saw that Trump endorsed Dahlstrom, again, kind of a not something that I saw coming in this regard. Do you? I mean, I think Begich is the maverick that Trump was, same kind of vein as far as that goes. Did that make any sense to you?
No, not really, but I'm still backing Nick. Have you had him on lately?
He was on last Monday. So yeah, he was on.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I have him on every couple of weeks. He's a great guy. I fully support him and endorse him. And I know that he's been talking with Trump. He was down at Mar-a-Lago. He's been working, some of these things. I just have no idea. It's like Trump said, one of his people said, you got to endorse her. And so he did. I mean, that's just kind of what it feels like in this. I mean, to me anyway.
Does he have any other irons in the fire right now?
Who, Begich?
Trump?
Or Trump?
No, Trump.
Well,
is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like the guy's not busy. Don't get me wrong, but still, I mean, come on. I'm going to drain the swamp by putting Nancy in there. She's going to be fine. She's a fighter. I don't know what she fought for, but she's a fighter. All right, we're going to get back to it here. Chris Story, The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense, Liberty Base, Free Thinking, yada, yada, yada. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Oh, yeah. It's that one final segment that we wait for on Tuesdays, the uplift, after we've delved down into the filthy swamp, politics and truth. Brad Keithley. Not that Brad Keithley is a filthy swamp, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean, baby.
Filthy animal.
Filthy animal. Chris Story, our guest here on the big old radio show. He is joining us this morning to talk wood ticks, lunatics, politics. No, that's other people. He's here to talk with us about positivity and life coaching and how to be better for ourselves and how to become millionaires and how to just a little bit of everything. Today, he wants to talk about Dwight being right. Chris, what's up? What's going on?
Well, I think a lot of us have learned a lot of strategy and life lessons from sitcoms. And I think The Office had a lot to offer, a lot of wisdom in The Office. And so today's topic is Dwight's right. At some point, Dwight Schrute asks Jim, do you want to form an alliance? And of course, this alliance was going to be against Michael Scott. I forget the exact circumstance, but I never forgot the phrase, do you want to form an alliance? And Jim looks to the camera and looks back to Dwight and says, yes, Dwight, I would like to form an alliance with you. And that's the truth of success in any area of life, is forming an alliance. And Andrew Carnegie called it a mastermind alliance, and basically said that whoever reaches the highest peaks of life must understand and utilize the concept of a mastermind alliance. And the concept of it was then codified by Napoleon Hill throughout his works over the course of 60 years. He wrote about, you could almost boil down everything he wrote to the concept of, or at least a foundational principle of forming a mastermind alliance. We already do it. And by definition, it is when two or more minds align on a single purpose, on a single target, on a single definition of success or achievement, whatever it is. And we already do it. I think for the most part, probably everybody does, but I think it's acknowledging, recognizing, and then assimilating and really putting purpose and intent behind it and creating a mastermind specifically with the intent to do a certain thing or have or accomplish or become. I mean, Weight Watchers is an incredible example. Alcoholics Anonymous is an incredible example that we can all know somebody who's benefited from either of those mastermind alliances. Sometimes you pay to be part of one. Sometimes you just form one with those in close proximity. My wife and I, Tiffany, have had basically this acknowledgement of a mastermind between the two of us since we started in business together, and nothing's changed. It's just gotten stronger. And so by definition, a mastermind is when two or more minds come together. Actually, a third entity is formed, a new and more powerful, a superhuman. Just like when Will Ferrell said in Kicking and Screaming to the little tiny guy, if he would get on the shoulders of the big tall guy, they could create like a superhuman player in soccer. And that's exactly what happens anytime you form a mastermind alliance. Again,
Right.
just two. Doesn't have to be 38 people. Doesn't have to be where you fly to Las Vegas and meet with a whole group of people and pay thousands of dollars to join a quote unquote mastermind. It literally could be in your own backyard where you are with what you got and somebody that's already very close to you.
Yeah. The concept of a mastermind, when I first started reading Napoleon Hill, it really intrigued me because I had mentors in my life up until that point, before I read Napoleon Hill, which I was probably in my early 20s, 21 maybe when I first read it. I had already had some mentors in my life who had helped me in a form of a mastermind, and I'd seen the benefit of working with them and getting knowledge from their experience and working through things together. And I continued to use that in my life as I continued to, start the show and work in other aspects of radio and do some of these other things. And it was always great to do that because you're right. It's the more minds together attacking a problem or attacking a goal or doing things like that, where they're all pointing in the right direction, and something always new comes out of it. And I agree with you. There's something about that, sharing ideas and pulling them together. And I loved Napoleon Hill's concept of a third mind being created, because it really is this overarching thing. And this gets back into things that are way too deep for this show, quantum, mechanics and some of these other things about, belief and, creating things, out of belief and things like that. But you're 100% right. And the best story that I ever remember about this was the Henry Ford story. Remember when he got sued for libel, or he sued somebody for libel? Because they basically said Henry Ford was an idiot, and they put him on the stand and they asked him all these questions about the business. I mean, individual this and that. And he basically said he said, I can't answer any of those questions. He goes, but let me tell you what I got. On my desk, I have a box with a bunch of buttons on it. And when I need to answer one of those questions, I push the button, I bring in somebody from my team, and we answer the question, and they have the answer, and we work on it together. I mean, it was kind of like the ultimate master. He had his employees were his team, but it doesn't have to be employees. It could be friends. Like you said, you don't even have to pay for it. If you can find somebody that is going where you want to go, or at least has knowledge of things that you don't have knowledge of, that's an amazing. I consider Chris Story to be part of my mastermind as far as real estate and properties and some of these financial things, because he knows things that I don't know. If I have questions about that, I call Chris at 2:00 in the morning and wake him up and make him talk to me about it.
That's true. That's why I turned my ringer off. But speaking of Henry Ford, I just read an article written about him. It was actually an excerpt from a biography that talked about the original mastermind. They didn't use this term, but how influential his wife was on the business. Absent Mrs. Ford, there was no Ford Motor Company. And that, to take your point to the next level, I think was the original mastermind. It was the original concept for him, even before he got with Harry Firestone. That then took the business to another level once those two combined forces and aligned on a single purpose of, blanketing the country with automobiles. But we often look at the event or some big success and say, oh, look at what they did. Look at Taylor Swift just became a billionaire. Wow. And a pop singer, a billionaire, not alone. There's an entire process and there's an entire mastermind behind the scenes, but we look at the person on the stage, or we look at the event of somebody selling a business for $1 million or $1 billion and go, wow, I wish I had started Instagram and then sold it to Zuckerberg for 48 billion or whatever. But we're not seeing the mastermind of the two guys who started it and failed and kept moving forward, and again between the two of them pushed it over the goal line. And we see the event. We see Tiger Woods winning the green jacket. We see Tiger Woods, just ascending to the top of golf. But there's a whole mastermind alliance behind him, from his, verbally abusive father down to the coaches that took him to the next level. Absent them, we wouldn't even know the Wood's name. We wouldn't even know about him. So it doesn't have to be just in sports or big business. It could be any area or arena of life that you want to do, achieve, or have something. If you'll form an alliance with even just one other person, you can't help but win. You can't help but go further than you could on your own.
We got about 3.5 minutes here, Chris. So how do folks go about starting, this mastermind, this mentor group? What's the best way to do it? I mean, in your opinion, what's the best way to try and figure this out and figure out who you need to talk to?
Thinking about this, actually, for writing my new book, The Millionaire Maker, I went back to my old book, The Backyard Millionaire, and thought about it quite deeply, in that there's two circles. You have your circle of proximity, you have your circle of influence, and they don't have to be the same. There's somebody, I would contend to you that there's somebody in your circle already who you're maybe in alliance with already, but maybe it's not as defined or it's not as purposeful as it could be. I would look at my two circles of life, those that are near me by proximity, but also those that I'd like to either have more influence in my life or that already do have a great deal of influence, but maybe they don't even know you want to achieve something. Maybe they don't even know that you're not necessarily wanting to work at the same job for the next 25 years or whatever it is. But if you express to them, here's what I want to accomplish. Do you have any advice for me? Do you have any counsel, better than advice? Do you have any words of wisdom? Would you be willing to help me move this goalpost or move closer to the goalpost that I've set? And just look at the people that are already within your circle, your sphere of influence. Chances are really good, if not great. You've already got people right there and you're already in alliance with. They trust you, like, and trust them. And it's just a matter of, you don't even have to go and say, would you like to join my alliance like Dwight did? But at the same time, you could just start to deepen that relationship or at least make it more purposeful. I have some friends that I don't see for a while, but then when we get together, we cannot help but fall back into alignment and start talking about business or start talking about how to solve a particular problem.
Right.
And I realized, oh yeah, that person's in my mastermind. I need to pay more attention to that.
Right. Well, and on the flip side of that, about 90 seconds here, on the flip side of that, you also talk about in The Backyard Millionaire that there are times when you need to cut people out of your mastermind, even people that are close to you, either geographically or relationships, or, you got to accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative, to quote the Disney song.
At least protect yourself from it. Some people you can't. There's going to be some people that attend the same family reunions, as it says in the book, and that you're not going to cut them out completely, but you're going to guard yourself against and safeguard against the poison that they can't help, but sometimes even well-intentionally pour into your ears. You need to guard yourself from that for sure.
It's an important piece. Probably one of the biggest things that I took out of the early works of Napoleon Hill that I read. Forming a mastermind, getting a group around you that have a defined goal that you're all working towards. It's important stuff. Dwight was right, and so is Chris Story. Thank you, my friend. As always,
it's
good to talk with you. I've never watched The Office. I guess I'll have to watch it now. So there we go. I appreciate you coming on board. Folks, we're out of time for today. We got more coming up tomorrow. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. And Chris hung up. Okay. So that means it's all good. All right, my friends. Well, I think that does it for me today. Tomorrow is another day. I got to show you my t-shirt. My wife got this for me. Can you see that? You can't see it. It says strawberry jams, but my Glock don't. I laughed so hard when she pulled that out. Strawberry jams, but my Glock don't. Anyway, it's a Firearms Friday shirt that I'm wearing on a Monday. What are you going to do? Or a Tuesday. What are you going to do? All right, my friends, we're out of here. We got to go. We will see you guys tomorrow. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. We will. We'll see you. We'll see you then. Mike Shower will be with us, and somebody else. I've forgotten already who it was. There's a lot to take care of when I'm doing the show. Sometimes I forget. All right, we will see you guys tomorrow. Again, be kind, love one another, live well. We will see you tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., bright and early. See you then.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.